The letter that changed everything. There are moments in life when you realize that a single act of kindness can ripple through time like a stone thrown into still water, touching shores you never imagined existed. This is the story of how one envelope, worn at the edges and marked with coffee stains, carried within it the power to transform not just one life, but an entire community. It's about the extraordinary capacity of ordinary people to choose compassion over convenience, to see humanity in strangers, and to understand that sometimes the smallest gestures create the loudest echoes. Sarah Mitchell had never considered herself special. At 42, she was a divorced mother of two, working double shifts at Mercy General Hospital as a nurse, barely making ends meet in a small apartment on the outskirts of Portland. Her days blurred together in an exhausting routine of medication rounds, patient charts, and the constant beeping of monitors. Most evenings, she'd collapse on her worn couch, too tired even to change out of her scrubs, wondering if this was all there was to life. It was a Tuesday morning in late November when everything changed. The rain hammered against the hospital windows as Sarah made her rounds on the fourth floor. Room 412 had been empty for weeks, but today there was a new patient, an elderly man named Walter Chen. He lay motionless in the bed, his weathered face peaceful despite the tangle of tubes connecting him to various machines. According to his chart, he was 87 years old, found unconscious in his home by a concerned neighbor. No family listed, no emergency contacts, just another lonely soul in a city full of people. Sarah checked his vitals with practiced efficiency, but something made her pause. On the bedside table sat a battered leather satchel, and peeking out from its opening was the corner of an envelope. She knew she shouldn't cry, but something about the careful way the bag had been placed, as if it mattered more than anything else, made her curious. The envelope was addressed to, "My dear friend," in shaky handwriting. Inside was a letter, and as Sarah began to read, tears welled in her eyes. Walter had written it to whoever found him, a final message he'd prepared knowing his time was running short. The letter told the story of his life, of fleeing China as a young man, of building a small tailoring business in America, of losing his wife to cancer 20 years ago, and of the crushing loneliness that followed. But it wasn't a sad letter. It was filled with gratitude for the life he'd lived, for the kindness strangers had shown him along the way, and for the beauty he'd witnessed in ordinary moments. The final paragraph made Sarah's breath catch. Walter had left instructions for his modest savings, roughly $30,000, to be distributed to people in his neighborhood who were struggling. He'd made a list, carefully noting who needed help with rent, who couldn't afford their medications, who had children going without winter coats. He'd been watching, caring, noting their struggles even as he lived alone in his small apartment. The letter ended with a simple request: please make sure they know someone cared. Please let them know they matter. Sarah sat down heavily in the chair beside Walter's bed, the letter trembling in her hands. Here was a man who had so little, yet wanted to give everything away. A man who noticed the suffering of others even in his own pain. She looked at his peaceful face and made a decision that surprised even herself. She would make sure Walter's final wish came true, no matter what it took. The next weeks became a mission. Sarah spent her lunch breaks tracking down the people on Walter's list. There was Maria Rodriguez, a single mother of 3. Working 2 minimum wage jobs, always one emergency away from eviction. There was James Turner, a veteran living in his car, too proud to ask for help but unable to afford both food and his diabetes medication. There was the Kim family, refugees who'd arrived 6 months ago, their teenage daughter sleeping in the living room because their 1-bedroom apartment was all they could afford. But Sarah quickly discovered a problem. Walter's lawyer, a stern man named Mr. Pemberton, insisted the money couldn't be distributed without proper legal documentation, without proof that Walter was of sound mind when he made these wishes, without signatures and notarizations that an unconscious man couldn't provide. The bureaucracy was a wall Sarah couldn't climb alone. That's when she did something she'd never done before. She shared Walter's story on social media, posting a photo of the elderly man's peaceful face with his letter beside it. She expected maybe a few dozen likes from friends. What happened instead was extraordinary. The post went viral. Within 48 hours, it had been shared over 100,000 times. News outlets picked it up. But more importantly, people responded. A lawyer in Seattle offered to work pro bono to navigate the legal complexities. An accountant volunteered to ensure proper distribution. Donations started flooding in, people adding their own money to Walter's fund, wanting to be part of his final act of kindness. Sarah's phone rang constantly. A bakery owner wanted to provide free bread to the families on the list. A local clothing store offered winter coats for the children. A landlord called to say he'd defer rent for Maria Rodriguez for 3 months. The ripples were spreading, each act of kindness inspiring another, creating waves of compassion that extended far beyond what one elderly man had imagined. But the most profound moment came on a Thursday afternoon, 3 weeks after Sarah had found the letter. Walter's eyes flickered open. The doctors were astonished. Against all odds, he was waking up. Sarah was there, holding his frail hand as consciousness slowly returned. When he could finally speak, his voice was barely a whisper. "The letter?" he asked, fear in his cloudy eyes. Sarah smiled through her tears. "We're making it happen, Walter. But it's bigger than you ever dreamed." Over the next hour, she told him everything. She showed him the thousands of comments from people around the world who'd been moved by his story. She explained how his $30,000 had grown to over $200,000 through donations. She told him about the families whose lives were being transformed, not just by money, but by the knowledge that someone cared enough to see their struggle. Walter wept. These weren't tears of sadness, but of overwhelming joy. "I thought I'd die alone," he whispered. "I thought my life didn't matter to anyone." "You were never alone," Sarah said, squeezing his hand. "You just couldn't see how many lives you touched. Every person you helped with a kind word, every neighbor you waved to, every small gesture you thought went unnoticed. They all mattered, Walter. They all added up to this moment." The story could have ended there, with Walter recovering and his wishes fulfilled. But the ripples continued to spread in unexpected ways. Maria Rodriguez, overwhelmed by the help she received, started a community support group for single mothers. James Turner, finally able to afford proper housing and healthcare, began volunteering at a veterans center, helping others navigate the systems that had once baffled him. The Kim family's daughter, no longer sleeping in the living room and able to focus on her studies, earned a full scholarship to college. As for Sarah, she discovered a purpose. She'd been missing. She started a nonprofit called The Walter Effect, dedicated to helping people fulfill acts of kindness they might not be able to complete alone. She still worked as a nurse, but now she also connected people who wanted to help with those who needed it, creating a network of compassion that stretched across the city and eventually across the country. Walter lived another 2 years, healthy enough to attend the wedding of Maria's oldest daughter, to see James Turner's Veterans Center open, and to watch the Kim family's daughter graduate high school as valedictorian. He attended every Walter Effect event, a quiet presence whose story continued to inspire thousands to look beyond their own struggles and see the humanity in others. When Walter finally passed away peacefully in his sleep at 89, his funeral wasn't the lonely affair he'd once imagined. Over 500 people attended, each with their own story of how his kindness had touched their lives, directly or indirectly. They came from across the country, this community of strangers united by one man's simple belief that everyone matters, that everyone deserves to know they're seen and valued. Sarah gave the eulogy, and as she looked out at the sea of faces, she realized the true lesson of Walter's story. It wasn't about the money he'd left behind or even the specific people he'd helped. It was about the choice we all face every day, to see others or to look away, to act with compassion or to focus only on our own struggles, to believe that our small gestures don't matter or to understand that they might be everything to someone else. The letter that had started it all now sits framed in the Walter Effect office, a reminder that kindness isn't measured by grand gestures or large donations. It's measured by the intention to help, by the willingness to see others' pain, and by the courage to act even when we ourselves are struggling. Walter Chen had very little by society's standards, but he understood what so many miss, that in giving ourselves away, we become larger than we ever imagined possible. Today, the Walter Effect has helped orchestrate over 10,000 acts of kindness. But more importantly, it's changed how people see the world around them. They notice the neighbor who seems lonely. They help the stranger struggling with groceries. They understand that everyone they meet is fighting battles they know nothing about, and that a simple kindness might be the thing that helps someone hold on for one more day. And it all started with one nurse who decided to read a letter, to care about a lonely old man, and to believe that his final wish mattered enough to fight for. That's the power of humanity. Not that we're all heroes, but that we all have the capacity to choose kindness, and in doing so, to change the world in ways we'll never fully comprehend.